Hello. Hi everyone to this language team meeting.
Where's my window? Oh yeah, this one. Okay. All right. Shepherded item updates. So I'll have to bother these people, but I added these for them for our latest. I don't think there are any major discussions happening so far, except that inline assembly and safe transmute, there have been RFCs proposing them, and I created repositories and Zulip streams.
For constant evaluation, we now have a PR open to introduce looping constructs like while and loop, but not for, because those require iterators. And we fixed the bug and some other things. And there is one interesting thing to discuss about limits for looping, like to avoid getting into infinite loops and whatnot. For FFI unwind, don't know, is there something new?
The new thing is mostly that we, yeah, sort of. The new thing is that we're, I'm sick of not doing anything. So we're going to, we haven't done much because people are busy, but what we'd like to do is, first of all, we never merged the RFC. We'd like to do that. I'd like to schedule a design meeting, which I have to make happen, and use that as an impetus to kind of either get some data or just make a decision without data. I don't think it'll take that much work to get data, but it's been blocked by annoying things. And the idea would be then that we can schedule some meeting where we can talk it out, and we can write a blog post that lays out the sort of summarizes what's up before that, so that people have a heads up that we're going to talk about it, and maybe they want to give their thoughts or join in or whatever.
Right. With respect to merging RFCs, I don't have the time I used to, so
yeah, I'm going to do that later today. I thought I already did, but
I think that's for the grammar. Right, there's Dynatrace as well.
Yeah, the status there is I put in an hour today going through results. I almost finished, didn't quite, of categorizing. I think there's like 2 or 3 impulses left, and I kind of uncovered some interesting categories. I don't know what I think we probably want to have a meeting to talk that out in more detail, because the last time, at least in our last meeting, Josh sort of suggested he wasn't so on board with my proposed fix, for example. In any case, I want to start, I thought it'd be good to get this categorization done so that I could kind of explain. What I did find was, I don't know that I found any terribly interesting, like it depends on how much we care about impact. But I kind of broke it into patterns, like some things where we really need the implicit specialization that we have today, where you use virtual dispatch for Dynatrace, like, and some cases where it's kind of this bridge between, and it actually would be okay if we didn't use specialization, but I couldn't figure out any way yet. Like, you have to actually read the code of the impl to decide whether the semantics would change or be equivalent, and there's like no, I couldn't figure out an automated test that would just differentiate between these two cases. And the other observation I would make, though, is that all of the unsoundnesses, I think, arise because of associated types. Like, that's mainly because you can't observe the method types yet. And I hope maybe we would add some feature in the future where you could, but right now, method types can't be observed.
Right. It's right, and constants aren't possible because those.
Right. So it may be, I don't know, those are just like handles where maybe we can do something, even if it's only a temporary thing, to mitigate the impact on existing crates. I do feel still that we're probably going to want some sort of Rust 2021 cleaner system here that you opt into, because it probably doesn't automatically compile. Though I don't quite know what that is, but. All right, grammar.
So the people who are working mostly on the spec aren't here, but I've made a series of refactoring PRs to the Rust-C parse, sorry. And yeah, that's basically it.
So as we said last time, we walked back the never type stabilization, and I'm going to try to bump the priority of this fallback link, since it seems like we really need that to stabilize bang or never, or at least that's the preferred path. We can't separate them as easily as we thought. So I haven't done that yet. All right. Looking at, should we jump? So for p-high issues, what's this? Maybe we should talk about them. What is this first one? Usage of
that should say constants, but
what? Oh,
use of erroneous constants.
Okay, that
there we go.
More grammatical than I originally thought. What's happening here?
So this is a question of whether using a constant in certain locations should result in a hard error or not, and what guarantees we provide. And I think there was a soundness issue as well, which has been fixed, which is the ensure that we get a hard error on generic ZST constants if they're something.
Always PR, which is at the bottom, has a better description of it. Replace our fragile safety scheme.
Right, exactly.
But yeah, it has to do with I think it has to do with how const propagation handles zero size types and order of passes, but I don't know.
My inclination, so from my perspective, optimizations should have no effect on what is a hard error and what isn't. So what I would suggest is that if a constant is live according to NLL, then it's used, and there would be an error in that constant, then there should be a hard error, because that's an analysis we already use. And anything beyond that would be like a lint error. And the reason I think that distinction is important is because what is like the language specification shouldn't depend on optimizations, basically.
Yeah, that's pretty correct. The other thing I would observe is that, well, this has some flavor. There's a general problem of people assuming we're going to report errors, let's say, in certain situations, and relying on that as a safety guarantee when maybe that error, might be lifted in the future. Like if you somehow were relying that loop doesn't work in a constant, and that's how you guarantee that this thing will always have bounded execution time, and then we add support for loops. Now your bound is out the window. Which I think is kind of a general problem. Like it's the same with if we declare something as UB, do we have the right to make it defined in the future? I
think it's pretty clear cut that you shouldn't do a negative reasoning about lints, at least. And since const error is a lint, you shouldn't.
Right.
But make such reasoning.
Probably clear cut, but I just think it behooves us to, especially for hard errors, to. Okay, I missed that this was a lint. I agree with that. That seems clear. But the more we can. It would be good if we can define exactly what some minimum set is that we expect to evaluate, I guess.
Right. And so I think minimum set would be, so because we already do make assumptions about control flow and dead things in NLL, in the bar checker. Like if you write if return and then the block is dead. And so if you have like lifetime errors or something in the block, those are just ignored because the block is not live. And so if you would have a bad constant inside the block, then that would not result in an error. But if you wrote, say, if false, and then you had a bad constant in the block, NLL would see that as live, and because it's live, according to the bar checker, it should become an error, basically.
Okay, so I agree. So there's one aspect, what counts as dead code. NLL has a definition, which is pretty compatible with our, like historically, we have not considered if false. We understand things like return and panic or break and panic, but not if false. And the idea would be in dead code, constants constant evaluation errors are not expected, something, or lints. But I don't quite know what's being proposed in Ali's PR, I guess. How does it differ?
I think that's an implementation strategy, like putting them in that vector. We could, depending on what we put in the vector, we can ban different things. If it's just the thing, just the output from the bar checker, then we would get one result. If it's like everything, then we might get some other results.
So it seems like, in particular, right now we're kind of running after optimizations. That's the first problem. This is moving to be before optimizations, more like the validated stage or something. And then the question is, do we do like a depth first search from the start point and find all the things that are reachable from there? That would be the definition you were giving, I think, Central.
Yeah.
Or do we scan all code? There might be unreachable blocks. I don't know if we've already stripped them or not, but that's kind of the point.
So if we look at unreachable blocks, that would be strictly more conservative than if we didn't.
Yes.
I guess it's a question of what's less complicated to implement is one interesting question. What's
Ralph's
hard?
asking the same question.
Yeah, I provided some thoughts later down the road.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I would like to have one consistent standard for what we consider like dead code, that and not kind of from the point of view of getting hard errors.
Right. Yes. That might be like ostensibly having collecting fewer constants would be faster than trying to error on more, unless if a reachability analysis would be more complicated, I guess.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't think compilation time is the first consideration, right?
Yeah, I agree.
I also don't. It's unlikely that there's so much dead code. I guess you can imagine some contrived examples where some huge functions that are mostly dead or something. But anyway, it seems very weird that we would use two different standards. I think that would be confusing.
It might be that we can like use both the existing analysis for lifetimes, possibly, like do it inside NML or something.
Right. I mean, I think we would gather if nothing else, we would gather the constants on the IR. Right. Okay. Yeah. Well, I guess we should provide that feedback. Right? It seems like we're pretty consistent about it. Do you think?
Well, it's just us three, but yeah.
Yeah, I know. I
It's
mean,
2.5.
we it as Nico and Central and Ecstatic Voice.
Yeah, I think that's a sensible.
Do you want to
idea
read that comment?
Yeah, I can leave a comment.
Okay.
Sure. Pin. So moving on, pin is unsound due to rogue DRF reference implementations. With the cost of characters in the meeting, I don't think we can do anything with this other than to possibly schedule a meeting to discuss the details, which I think is a good idea.
I think it's the right thing. I was at one point caught up. I'm now probably a little behind. What I would like to do, I guess we don't have to go over it here, but I will talk to Ralph and Boats. I would like to kind of come into the meeting with a few things, like, for example, a sketch of one of the things, at least that was a hot topic of debate, it may have shifted a little, was like where to enforce the constraints, the safety constraints. And I would like to be able to, and which mode was simpler, sort of. And I think to help us make that judgment, it would be useful if we had a kind of sketch of what it looks like in both cases, which is something I hadn't seen. As often happens, there's like back and forth, people arguing, but nobody like laying out what it would look like in each path.
Right. Yeah.
But so I was hoping to reach out to Ralph and try to work through it.
Yes, it would be good if both were attended the meeting as well.
Yes. All right. I think we want to act quickly and relatively on this. So it doesn't seem to have doesn't seem to have too much impact on existing code, but the faster we act, the more true that is.
Yeah.
I'll take that. Okay. So that's pin. We already talked about this. This is cool. So you're doing some range patterns here, Central?
Yeah. So I have a PR which introduces the half-open range patterns, which basically makes them consistent with the behavior for expressions entirely. And I guess my question is how we want to tackle this process-wise. What I would suggest is that we land the PR and then I can follow up with an RC or something.
Yeah, this feels analogous to like Into Future to me. Like I don't know how you could be against this. But I don't have an objection to an RFC. I think we should move quickly on it, though. We don't need to
Yeah. Well, I would like to. What I would like to do is to specify both exhaustive patterns and half-open. Not exhaustive. Exclusive range patterns. Yes. In the same RC, because that one, the exclusive one, also didn't receive an RC, and then we can maybe an RC to stabilize both or something.
Yeah, the only thing I guess that might interact with this was the syntax for slices or something.
Yeah, and we resolved that one.
And we resolved that.
Yeah, which is actually
good.
So we resolved it by having dot be a rest pattern, which is like a syntactic construct in the AST, and if you write like x at dot, then you have then you bind like the rest to x.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I remember that discussion. I couldn't remember if it like drifted off into almost got done but didn't quite, or if we actually did resolve it. Good.
Yeah, we did. We had 2 RFCs about it.
It took a long time, as I recall.
Yeah.
All right. I think landing under a gate and an RFC is a good idea.
Yeah. Would an RFC to stabilize be fine with you?
Yes. I mean, sure. It's not something we normally do, but I don't see any harm in it.
Yeah. We did it for integer, exhaustive integer patterns once, which worked fine, I think.
And it just seems like a strange. Well, normally we stabilize, we review tests and so forth. It's like a different kind of process, but
yeah, sure.
RFC to specify the syntax, both open-ended ranges and exclusive ranges. Okay, that's fine. I don't care if it's an RFC to stabilize or whatever, but how we rephrase it.
Sure.
Okay, into future, Josh and Scott, they're not here. Okay, Felix isn't here.
I could talk about that if you want a summary.
Structural match?
The structural matching, because it weirdly overlaps quite a bit with the like the refactoring of const qualification that I did.
Actually, we could do a summary. I'm also interested in getting this resolved for good.
Okay.
Like we made this sort of hack around structural match to buy ourselves some time, which sort of worked, sort of didn't. It's not totally correct, but I would prefer if we just like settled what the semantics are and move on with our lives.
I agree, but I would also like this to be like more designed, like having a clear end goal.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm getting for.
Yeah. With perhaps like some document, not necessarily an RFC, but some elaborate document stating like
go on.
How things are supposed to work and what the goal is and so on. Right. Like how fine-grained do we want to be? What are the interactions with like cross generics and definitional equality?
And I would expect an RFC that tries to lay it out. But one of the challenges is, I guess, precisely that like const generics are what this is all about, essentially. That's
not necessarily.
I think so. Like I think one of the big challenges is what do you do in generic contexts, for example. But
so match and const generics don't necessarily have to use the same entirely the same construct. You can like have a trait structural equality for const generics, and then you use some more liberal scheme in for match expressions.
Yeah.
So you'd expose structural partial eq or whatever the current trait is, and bound by that in generic code, but then have sort of the value-based approach that Felix is implementing in this one.
That falls back to the traits, which is, I think, actually what the implementation does.
Maybe we should summarize. I'm not actually entirely sure what this PR does. So you said you could summarize. Maybe you want to.
Yeah. Well, so because they are working sort of they're working at the here level. So I can't tell you exactly what approach they're taking, but basically if you have stuff like a chain of constants, so you have one const that refers to another const that then appears in a match statement. They are then propagating this is maybe an enum, like so maybe an option where the sum variant is not structural match, but the none variant you could structurally match on. And they're propagating that qualification through chains of constants into and out of aggregate data types,
So,
etc. Sorry, I'm just looking at the
let me
test.
make an example. So is the idea like if I have something like this, I want to be able to match on that.
Yeah, you want to be able, correct. You want to be able to use foo as the pattern in a match arm. And so once you decide to do that, like once you decide that you can say const foo option of some non-structural match type equals none and use that as a match arm, then you're like, okay, well, what if I have two constants that refer to each other? There's a bunch of other interesting cases that he's handling.
Interesting.
And this is sort of, the reason there's overlap here is this is equivalent to, like, what if I have a type with indirect mutability inside an option? Someone decided at some point that you should be able to write const option cell equals none, or option reference to cell equals none, and that would work.
Right.
And this is a very similar analysis could be done here. But you get into, it's sort of a lot of work for this very strange case. Because we would have to do this eagerly if, in case the constant was used cross-crate, we'd have to calculate whether it was structural match ahead of time.
Because we don't propagate needed information to compute it in the other crate.
Yeah.
Right. So I think we should discuss in RC what like the end goal is, the complexity of doing this analysis, and like benefits, and like what parts of analysis we can reuse and what not.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if we just decide like what we want, I mean, I think we have a pretty good idea of what it would take to implement this now. And obviously Felix has a better idea than I do. But I do think that this is sort of under-designed, and maybe we should talk about what all the consequences of allowing like all this expressiveness around constants and match arms is.
Yeah, it'd be good to know why. I don't recall like what brought Felix to this PR, but
future compatibility limits. Like we decided something, and I think there was fallout and possibly.
Right. I'm just saying, like, to review that a little bit. There's all these cases, right? But okay.
But are you, Morris? Are you saying that we would do something else implementation-wise than the here-based blocker?
I think I think it's not. It would be easier to implement on the mirror, and you won't have like that's the reason we have mirror in the first place, is so we don't have to do these weird like traversing the here to try and figure out. So we have. I think that would be a better way to do this. But if there's some time pressure, which they seem, Felix seems quite eager to fix this. I don't
think there is time pressure. The lint has existed for a long time, so it's not like.
Okay. I do think that would be a better way to do it, but I need to coordinate with them a bit more because I don't fully understand the approach they're taking. And I'm not capable. I tried a bit to just do it myself, but I would need a little bit of mentoring from them, I think.
Cool.
it does raise the question that we don't currently have. I don't feel we have a constant generics is an area that's been inching along without, we don't have like a shepherd or a link. That might be nice to talk to Varcor and some other folks and try to see if we can set that up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At this point, I kind of give up, although I still like the. I mostly want this settled. I kind of give up caring about what. I'm happy if we find some people who seem like they know what they're doing. We'll probably find a solution I'm happy with. But I still feel weird about having many different versions of equality, but
yes,
I could get over it. Okay.
Who will leave a comment on this one, by the way?
Yeah, who will? Good question.
Should you or I?
I mean, I can leave a comment. I think we didn't really come to much conclusion beyond we should talk with. We would like to discuss it more.
Yeah, and possibly more design.
I'll summarize what we said, I guess.
Cool. So 20 minutes.
Oh, we're good. All right, let's see. What's next? It was mem zeroed thing, right?
Yes. So this is a PR that will cause panics on zero initialization in zeroed and uninit, similar to panics on uninhabited stuff, which we already have. But this is like a bit incomplete and doesn't seem fully triaged. I'm a bit wary of, or not a bit, I'm wary of like landing a partial implementation in the dynamic semantics. Lints are one thing, but doing it partially here, at least like without a clear roadmap for a clear accepted roadmap for this is where we want to end up, and so on.
What are the open questions here? Like, you have specific concerns?
There are a bunch of fix me's in the code.
Okay.
I guess that's the simplest way I can put it. Not that one specifically.
Right. That one doesn't seem so bad. Okay, these kind of.
Yeah. Like, I think this is fine for lints, but having like these things in the dynamic semantics and expected language feels not good.
I mean, I think I feel like what's kind of missing, I think this probably exists, but not, I just can't follow it, is like if we had a sort of unsafe code guideline roadmap that said we are working towards this, we are working towards like cleaning up mem zeroed and uninit, and here are the steps we're taking, and then this was like pointing into that roadmap and said this is step number 5. I would feel better. I suspect that sort of exists in Ralph's head and probably some other people's heads, but by now I've kind of forgotten it.
I guess I would be fine with like specifying the full design and then FCPing that one, and then Ralph can like implement it over a series of PRs. But I would not like to end up like in a half-baked state. Some like eventual consistency would be good.
Are these getting emitted as hard errors, or is it?
These affect the dynamic semantics of the language.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
We have lints already, but these are panics.
Right. I guess I was thinking, this seems like you would want to phase this in as like a pedantic. But I mean, it's not pedantic because these are UB, but. And I assume that that's what the plan is, but.
So this would be something that needs to end up in like a formal specification of the language.
Yeah.
Unlike lints, which are just don't exist.
It seems like this might be yeah, okay. I mean, I can see that. I guess I would like to discuss those questions, and it might be that it's okay. It might be that we have some identified areas where we presently this is UB, but like, and we're trying to figure out exactly what the line is. But if we at least knew what they are and why what are the unknowns around them and why is it deferred, that would be very helpful. Okay. This falls under need to get a better connection to unsafe code effort category, probably. Anyway, I basically agree with you, Central, at least to a first order approximation.
Cool. I'm not sure what's up. I'm not sure what the state of the triage is here as well.
Let's go down to the nominated issues because there's a lot of them. I forgot how many.
Yeah.
We'll come back to this. This needs a comment.
Okay. I guess I can leave it. Let's see. Should we skip the raw operator?
Yeah, we can skip that, I think. I just mostly wanted people to know it's happening.
Yeah. I think it's mostly a question of like reviewing for Ollie. We landed a part of it. And I think it's mostly for Ollie to review one thing, and there is one open question, which there is an issue for. Okay, so the next one is casting or adding type description to panic triggers unreachable code. And the design question here is whether versions and casts should like be considered to exist in terms of unreachable code. Do we consider them like a special case different from functions? And if we think there needs to be a change, we would throw this back to the entire team. And you could also segregate implicit coercions and casts. For example, type description, whether through a let binding or via the return type or whatnot, could do nothing in terms of the lint, so the lint wouldn't trigger, but the cost could trigger the lint. That would be one way to deal with it, or the cost could also not trigger the lint. So those are some of the options. I think. I think it's.
You probably don't have. We should probably raise this with more.
Yes, I would agree. But one benefit of that is that the author might have some input.
Yeah. I don't know what I think. I guess I feel like a simple approach might suffice, but
It would probably be more complicated in terms of the implementation to not limit in this case, because you need to avoid it in some circumstances.
I think it'd be pretty easy to just say, if it's a cast, don't limit. But
yeah, it wouldn't be very complicated, but it would. So I think it would strictly add code to the compiler rather than remove it.
I think for this one, I'll engage. I think we kind of figured out it was probably related to specialization. Let me add a to-do list item to the list. Six, 7, 1, 9, 4. Configurable per item instruction limit for CTFE.
Yeah, I could give a bit of background on this. This isn't a huge issue, so we could skip if you want to get to other stuff, but we should maybe talk about it a bit.
The only thing I would say, I should probably talk about it some more, but one thing I would say that one thing I don't like about our existing limits, like the recursion limit, for example, I don't like that you have to put it, if you write a macro that recurses deeply, you annotate the uses of the macro and not the definitions. And I imagine that similar thing would apply to constfns, and I would want to handle that well.
There's currently a massive hailstorm outside. I don't know if you can hear that on my mic, but okay. Yeah, sorry. Could you repeat that? It's a bit hard to hear, actually.
Sorry?
Could you repeat that, Nika? Or just
what I said was that with macros, today, there's a recursion limit, and if you expand, you have to tag it. Every crate that, if you have a macro that recurses deeply, every use of that macro needs to be tagged. And like every crate that uses that macro needs to grow the recursion limit. And I think I would prefer if we annotated the macro definition saying, hey, this macro is expected to recurse deeply, and then when the back edge is, I don't know exactly how it worked, but I think I would want to think about the design from that perspective. First of all,
because
the other thing
because the arguments might vary how deep the recursion would be, right?
Yeah, I mean, but the main thing is what I found in practice is like the goal of this is to detect a bug, right, in the user's code. And you usually have like macros where you know already it's going to recurse like arbitrarily deep based on the arguments, or just deeply, well, it's always based on the arguments, but it would be nice to just say, hey, I intend to do this recursion, like give it a bigger limit on the macro itself and not on the use of the macro. But the other thing is there's like a spec concern that we've just kind of been a little loose about exactly what these limits mean.
Right.
I think they mean nothing in the spec.
You pretty much know presently, but I think they could in theory. Like some of the limits are tieable to things like the type size limit, but
yeah, they seem specifiable, but one could also pretend that it's like really Turing complete and like.
Yes, you could. You could consider it implementation detail, except that it clearly has something to do with what crates are accepted or not. So.
Yeah, but it's like the actual limit could be would probably not be part of the spec, I think.
I don't know. I think we should not worry about it at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. But so my first question is why this is so urgent. Like, why does this need to block the loop PR?
Yeah, I was probably being a bit too alarmist. But basically, what we do now, there's no instruction limit, but there is we try and detect like trivial infinite loops. And if you if your const evaluation runs for, it's like a second and a half, it's sort of low because it just picked an arbitrary number. Then we start like traversing all of the heap memory in that particular constant evaluation and like comparing the stack. And we do this repeatedly until the hashes match, and we say, and
Oh, wow.
yeah, so it is quite expensive. And the reason this was okay is because you basically could never run into it. And so it was sort of like, okay, we'll have this thing, and then somewhat down the line we'll merge like loops and consts, and then we'll sort of figure out what exactly we want the semantics to be. So I want some way, if someone's like, hey, this constant evaluation is taking forever, I want to be able to say, oh, it's probably the infinite loop detector. We don't know what we're going to do about it, but you can pass this or add this attribute to turn it off, and you'll just run as fast as you possibly could.
So I would mainly like to get loop PR merged before the beta compiler branches so that we can use it in the standard library. And I don't think we need to block on having like limits and whatnot.
Yeah, that's fine.
For that. It's more of a quality thing, I think.
Yeah.
But I think for the larger thing discussion, we need more people.
The only caveat I would say to that, I think that's reasonable, except that if people start to rely on this and they have long-running, like they have some big constant that takes a while, and we want to set a limit that's smaller than that, and they should be opting in, we're going to have trouble doing so.
But I don't think that will happen in like 2 weeks or something.
I don't know.
I think people aren't going to rush into using this in the first 2 weeks. It exists on nightly.
What is this 2 weeks threshold? I don't quite understand that. You're saying you could do this before beta branches?
Yeah.
Okay, that seems fine, but I don't know that we know what we want to do yet. Right?
Just the loops.
I guess I would
be not the limits.
I think I would be happy if we stabilized. I think it would be okay to stabilize something where the limit can't be extended, except via some nightly attribute. Like there's some relatively low limit that you get by default on unstable, such that if you have a
Sure.
And then you need to use nightly if you want to have some huge constant, because we haven't quite figured out how that's supposed to work yet.
Right.
Yeah, the only thing I'm saying is that we can impose a limit, but being able to configure that limit isn't like something that we need to rush to have for now.
Yeah, but I'm disagreeing with that, I think. I think I'm saying I would prefer it's not stabilized with no limit.
Yeah. I agree.
But I'm just talking about like adding it to the nightly compiler so that we can start using loops in standard library.
The one thing about that is technically it's a breaking change, but because you don't have stable if, so you can't do, and there's a fixed stack size. So you don't have if unstable, you don't have loop unstable. So there you would literally have to hand type out a really long list of instructions.
Yeah. Okay, I just realized I was being confused anyway. For some reason, I thought we were talking about landing a stabilization on nightly.
We're
just talking about enabling it on nightly. Okay,
yeah.
then I feel a lot better. Never mind.
That is way down the line.
Yeah.
Then +1. I agree with you, Central. Sorry.
Cool. The pin stuff we've talked about. So let's move on to slice patterns.
What's going on?
2 minutes left.
Slice patterns. Oh, yep. This was nominated, right? But why?
Yep. Okay, so this is basically an update from my side. We have basically done most of the work that needs to be done to ship it. The syntax has been implemented, well tested. We have rewritten more or less all of the pattern matching logic. We have rewritten a lot of the pattern matching, exhaustiveness checking logic in general. and so on. Matthew landed a PR to fix some silence holes in move checking that Felix reviewed just now. There is like one outstanding ice that should be fixed, but other than that, I think that if like nothing serious happens in 6 weeks and we fix the ice and Matthew is happy with signing up on the tests and the implementation, then I think we can ship.
Cool. That's exciting.
Yep.
All right. We're about out of time. This other items was something I meant. I added this just as a heads up. This one, I don't know if there's any new developments.
Which one?
Floating point casts.
I think we sort of had a consensus in the language team, and then there was a bunch of discussion.
Yeah, okay. I guess
Maybe we need
do it
to
next time.
Yeah.
There's a lot here. Okay. All right. Thanks for attending.
Thanks.
Okay. Ciao.
Ciao.
Later.